Welcome to Proclaiming Justice, a podcast from PJTN that focuses the light of truth on vital issues in today's headlines that impact every American. I'm your host, Laurie Cardoza-Moore, founder and president of Proclaiming Justice to the Nations, and I'm here to educate, motivate, and activate you to action. I want to arm you with the truth and the facts you'll need to fight and preserve our constitutional republic and uphold the Judeo-Christian values our nation was founded upon. Welcome to Proclaiming Justice, a podcast from PJTN that shines the light of biblical truth on vital issues from today's headlines that impact every American, Jew and Christian, people of faith, and people of conscience. I'm your host, Laurie Cardoza-Moore. On today's podcast, I've invited Yaffa Bayta DaCosta back to continue our conversation on the Spanish Inquisition and crypto-Judaism. This is a topic that has fascinated me for years, and for all of you students of prophecy, you're going to find our guest fascinating too. We hear so much about the Holocaust, but there was another tragic event that preceded the Holocaust by 500 years, where Jews were targeted in Spain and Portugal during the Spanish Inquisition. Now, if you missed last week's podcast with Yaffah, you will find it in our previous podcast lineup on our website at pjtn.org. I also want to remind you to listen and share this and all of our previous podcasts with your family and friends so that they can become more informed about this and other related issues. Our goal at PJTN is to equip you to stand against the disinformation by taking back local control of your community and your children's and grandchildren's education. Remember to visit our website daily to receive updates on all of PJTN's groundbreaking initiatives and programs, and sign up to receive PJTN's media and action alerts to share with family and friends. As PJTN Watchmen, your action could mean all the difference in the success of our global mission, so please help me spread this vital information today. God told the prophet Obadiah that in the last days he would wipe out the descendants of Edom because they stood by while their brother Jacob was held in captivity and did nothing. This obscure prophet has some compelling things to tell this generation, and Yaffah is here to explain this end-time prophetic event as it relates to the Jews of the Iberian Peninsula. Ladies and gentlemen, we are honored to welcome back Rabbanit Yaffa Bayta DaCosta. Rabbanit DaCosta is the founder and CEO of Bnei Anousim since 2005, an Israeli nonprofit. Her organization is made up of 30 managing directors from all over the world and many committed supporters and activists globally, most of whom are themselves from the Bnei Anousim. People have joined this organization over many years to work with Yaffah in helping the Bnei Anousim to make a full and public comeback to the faith and traditions of their Sephardi Jewish ancestors. Yaffah's upcoming 30th anniversary of being involved with this movement will be on Purim of 2022. Yaffah is herself from the Bnei Anousim, and she made a full return in 2000. She has an extensive business management consulting, coaching, and projects management background with corporate 100 companies in the USA. She has over the years also worked with Bnei Noach. She has been a leader or facilitator of some Jewish Christian relations and interfaith groups. And you can reach her at her personal email address at yaffbatya@yahoo.com. That's yaffbatya@yahoo.com. Yaffah, welcome back to Proclaiming Justice. We're honored to have you back on our program today.
Oh, thank you so much, Lori. I really appreciate your inviting me to do this. You know, it's it's a topic that's near and dear to our hearts, both yours and mine. And I have been involved in a very long time with people who have this ancestry and who are trying to swim upstream like salmon, going back home to their spawning ground. So it's been a long haul. I've enjoyed it so much, and I really, really love helping people that have this ancestry and this history that I also share. So I'd be happy to answer your questions and help your audience to understand this movement just a little bit better.
Yeah, I think we'll have some members of the audience that do hear this who this is going to connect with them personally, and they're going to want more information. But last week we discussed the Bnei Anousim and the Sephardic Jews. And so this week I want to pick up where we left off. I want to discuss the history of this little known group and of people, and why they must not be overlooked or forgotten in these end time events that are occurring. We see, a lot of Christians see the Jews making aliyah, going back to the land, and many of them are from the community from Europe and Ashkenazi Jews, Jewish background. But we don't hear a lot about this little known group, the Sephardic Jews. But this is an important audience that we should not overlook. So tell us, let's start out by just talking about the history of, just quick, brief history of the Sephardic Jews, of the Bnei Anousim, and why do you think this is an important topic for today?
Okay, sure. Well, these Jews lived in the countries that are on the Iberian Peninsula, and that's called Iberia also, which is Spain and Portugal. And they were exiled from the southern kingdom of Judah by the Romans in the 2nd century after the Second Jewish War, all of which, by the way, all that information is available on the internet. Just people can get into their favorite search engine and type in, the Roman Jewish Wars and the expulsion of the Jews from the southern kingdom of Judah. But these Jews went all over the Roman Empire of that day. It wasn't just Italy. It was southern European countries, France, Spain, Portugal, Greece, the Balkans, all over the Middle East and Southern Europe, all around the Mediterranean, as a matter of fact. Now, what happened was in the 14th century, 1300s, there started to be pogroms in Spain, in particular, against the Jews. Very, very much hateful rhetoric started. It always starts with words, and then it goes into violence. Okay, we see that even with domestic abuse, okay, where it starts with verbal abuse and then goes into actual physical violence. Well, that's what happened to the Jews in Spain, and eventually they were expelled from Spain in 1492. I think most people probably know that part of the story and that date very well, in particular because that's the date when Columbus left, 1492.
Right.
To search out, the new world and he thought he was going to India. Of course, we know where he ended up.
Mm-hmm.
But, and some people do think he was a secret Jew or a crypto Jew. By the way, that's where the term comes from. Crypto means secret or hidden. Okay. So what happened was in Spain, the two monarchs, Ferdinand and Isabella, who had joined two of their communities in Spain in a combined monarchy, they told the Jews of Spain they had three choices. They could leave, convert, or die. Okay. So the ones who stayed probably had to stay. They didn't have the ability, didn't have the money or whatever. So they were forced to convert in that sense, but they did have a choice. They could leave. There were many Jews who left Spain, and some of them went right over the border, the Pyrenees Mountains that exist between Spain and southern France. So some of them went into southern France, and they became what's known as the Huguenots, by the way, which is another section of this peoplehood of the secret Jews. And then a good portion of them, some scholars think maybe even half of the Jews of Spain went over the border into Portugal, which is the country that's to the west of Spain and on the Atlantic Ocean. Now, 4 years later, the King of Portugal, Manuel, wanted to marry the daughter of Ferdinand and Isabella. So what they said to him was, well, if you want to marry our daughter, you have to get rid of your Jews like we got rid of our Jews. Okay. So he issued an expulsion edict, and that's on record. I mean, they have this document, the scholars do, but he didn't follow it. He gave the Jews 10 months to leave, but then at the end of that 10 months, there were many of these Jews who all congregated in a port city called Oporto, because they wanted to leave and get on ships and leave Portugal, and they were denied the ability to leave. They were brought into the plazas of the churches because there were so many of them, they couldn't bring them into the vestibule of the church for baptism. So they sprinkled holy water in the air of the plazas, okay, and en masse forcibly converted all of the Jews. No choice. They were just converted. And then they were told to be good Christians. I think they were given 2 or 3 or 4 in that range number of years to sort of get with the program kind of thing. But then the persecution started. If they were thought to be lapsing into Judaism or actually secretly practicing Judaism, that was called Judaizing. It was a crime, and they could be brought before the church tribunals. And if they were convicted of this crime, okay, then they would be brought before the civil authorities for execution, which was being burnt at the stake. Okay. So this was a horrible period of time during the Inquisitions. I like to call what they went through, what these people went through, as the 4 T's. Okay. Trauma, terrorism, torture, and termination. Those are the 4 things that happened to these people.
Wow.
They were turned in by neighbors, by if they were sort of on the upper class side and had servants, they could be turned in by a servant who would see something and say something. Okay. This is what worries me about what's going on today. This expression, if you see something, say something.
Right. Right.
Okay.
This is not a new concept.
No.
Obviously.
And it's people turning in other people to authorities, okay, about something. Now, in Israel, we have this expression, but it's very specific to a bag, a suitcase, some object that could actually have a terrorist bomb in it. Okay. So in that sense, if you see something and it's unowned, it's just sitting around, okay, out on the street or in, the airport or in a bus terminal, whatever, you see something that looks like nobody owns it. Yeah, of course, say something because that could harm people. So that's a different way of view. But I've heard this expression, if you see something, say something about people who haven't been vaccinated or, fill in the blank, whatever. Okay. And that's very dangerous. Well, that's what happened 500 years ago. And then, and I'm going to start to say some things that most people don't know about this history of the Jews. The Inquisition lasted for about 320 years. Because when they finally did leave Portugal and Spain, and they went to the colonies of Portugal and Spain, they went to Mallorca, which is Spanish, they went to the Canary Islands, which is Spanish, they went to the Azores from Portugal, which is where my mother's family was from. And then from there, from the colonies, they went to the so-called New World, which was Mexico and the Caribbean islands and Hispaniola. That island is shared now by the countries of Haiti and Dominican Republic. And they went to Jamaica. Of course, they went to Brazil, which is Portuguese. Okay. They went to all these countries, and a lot of them were trying to escape the Inquisition, which followed them there. And that's where a lot of the 300 or more years of continuing slaughter of people, and, if they didn't actually burn them at the stake in person, and kill them, they burned them in effigy. either in Mexico City or back in Portugal and back in Spain. It was a horrible history. And then after that initial 300 and some years, people were still afraid to come out in the public and be recognized as a Jew for fear. And we had fear driven into our families. It's almost at the level of DNA. Okay, like,
So,
and I was, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so hold on just a second. I would just want to go back to what you were talking about with regards to, if you see something, say something. It makes sense now because you talked about the crypto Jews and hiding their identity. And the reason why they hid their identity was to save themselves and their families. And
Right.
here we have, a similar event occurring in our lifetime where we're being asked to turn people in. So now we understand why the Jews of Spain and Portugal, ultimately, eventually Portugal, didn't want to share, didn't want to tell. And I know that there are many, I've heard many stories of Jews who would not tell their children that they were Jewish until their deathbed and
Right.
wanting their kids to know because there was always this underlying fear that goes back. And, Yaffa, you and I have kind of talked about this, in the past. We've had this conversation, but how does that alter your DNA? And I mean, literally, how does that alter future generations? And the impact of hiding your identity. Once you find out who you are you more likely to keep what you know a secret for fear of being targeted?
Oh, absolutely. Because we were raised with that fear. And I started to say that in my family, my mother, who had this identity, okay,
Mhm.
and of course all of her cousins and all of that family. I mean, I wasn't allowed to eat at anyone's home except my mother's home and my aunties, my cousins,
Mhm.
family, because we were raised with this slogan or motto of you can't trust anyone outside the family.
Mm.
So going to school, I couldn't have friends. I couldn't bring
Mhm.
friends into the home. I couldn't bring anybody home. Only family, other family, our cousins
Mhm.
and those kinds of people
Mhm.
could come to the home. And that was true of all of the family, all the cousins. Okay. So we were very close knit family, which was very nice. Okay. But there was this whole thing of you can't trust anyone outside the family. When you're raised with that kind of fear, now,
Mhm.
obviously, we weren't confined to home. We could go out, we can go to school and go to the store and, do
Right.
errands and all kinds of things. It wasn't like a lockdown situation, which brought so much fear into so many homes because of COVID, as you know, recently.
Mhm. Right.
But if you're raised with fear all your life, that's all you know growing up, and you're not even sure why. I mean, why can't I trust anybody outside the family? But they don't tell you that part,
Mhm.
except the deathbed confessions. Okay,
Right.
they would mumble some words that wasn't familiar to the other members of the family. It was a different language. They would be blessing the children, putting their hands on the heads of the little ones, and blessing them in the context of a deathbed confession and all of that. But in a lot of cases, while the customs and traditions were handed down, Jewish customs, but
Mhm.
we didn't know they were Jewish, okay? But the fear was passed down without knowing why. And
Mm.
that can be rather confusing.
Mhm. Yeah, absolutely. When you bring up the fact about not being able to eat at other people's homes, I remember my own mother telling me that you are not to eat when we were little growing up in our neighborhood. And of course, I never quite understood why. There was
Mhm.
never a reason behind it, just that these are the things that you're allowed to do and things that you're not allowed to do, never connecting it to this. So as I'm sitting here listening to you repeat these stories and share this, it's bringing back those memories of things that were taught to us And, of course, now we understand why our parents didn't want, and grandparents and great grandparents didn't want us to know about our identity and our history for this very reason, so that they would not be targeted. But
Well, that's part of it, but the other part of it is the kosher laws. Okay. If some of these other people that you would meet in school, you'd have friends and whatever, and if you got invited to their home, they might not separate meat and dairy. They might not check eggs for a spot of blood. They might not take the blood clot out of the bottom of a chicken thigh, a piece of meat, whatever. So they might serve that child of yours, or my mother's, food that wasn't kosher, that wasn't acceptable because they
Right.
were Jews. Look, a secret Jew is still a Jew. It's just
Right.
that they're keeping their head down and they're doing it in private and in secret, not making a public show of it for fear because of what happened to our ancestors. But they're still Jews.
Yeah, and that fear comes as a result of what was done to
Right.
our ancestors, how they were treated, being threatened to be burned at the stake, but then going through the torture.
Right.
Talk a little bit about some of the examples of how they instilled fear in Jews through their methods of torture. Of course, one of the greatest ones is being, threatened to be burned at the stake. But there were other methods of torture that they used against Jews.
Oh, yeah, there were torture chambers. I mean, they would put them on a rack and stretch them out. They would hang them, from their wrists, okay, and poke them with hot irons or whatever, anything to cause pain, okay, to force them to admit that they were a Jew or that they were practicing Judaism or that they were what the church called Judaizing. Okay, that was a crime in the church. It was considered a heresy. Okay, now right around that time in the early 1500s, 16th century, okay, after 1492, of course, you have this uprising in the church of the Protestant Reformation. Okay, they were also considered heretics. And they were also, if caught, persecuted and all of that stuff. So it wasn't just the Jewish people that were persecuted by the Roman Catholic Church. This is the Roman Catholic Church. The difficulty of today that these secret Jews have, these crypto Jews have, is that there's still some fear running around. Okay, that's understandable. But there's practically no one in the Christian world, and I say Christian world, and I get some pushback from some Christian friends who say, well, don't say Christians because that was the Catholics that did that to your ancestors. Okay.
Oh,
And,
yeah.
And my pushback to them is, but the anti-Semitism of today that comes out of Christianity, all of Christianity, okay, it's not just Roman Catholic, it's all of Christianity, is based on that early form of the hate of the Jews. It's called the theology of contempt, okay, that started in the second century. It wasn't in the first century. It started in the second century. We could go into a whole program just on that and replacement theology. But the bottom line is the largest form of anti-Semitism today is Christian anti-Semitism. I'm sorry to say it. It's Christian anti-Semitism. And it all goes back to that hatred that was promoted, that was provoked, that was taught to the children as they grew up. Okay? Because in the Christian mind, God had done away with the Jews.
Right.
And now the Christians were the new Israel. The Christians had replaced the Jews. And look, if you're told as a child, God has done away with these people, give them any label you want. Okay, I don't care what the label is.
Right.
And you're told God has done away with them. God hates them. They sinned. They rebelled against God. And they did. That's true. Okay. But God also says he would never do away with his people Israel.
That's
Okay.
correct.
So that's the rub.
Yeah, you bring up a very important aspect, and this is something important for our Christian audience to understand, is that the Roman Catholic Church, um, initially the Hebraic fathers of the followers of Yeshua at the time, they were not practicing Christianity. They were following the Torah. They were sitting in the synagogues on Shabbat studying the Torah of Moses. It was the Catholics when the Greek fathers started coming into the congregation and pulled them away. And unfortunately, the Roman Catholic Church established that bias. And fortunately, 1965, the Pope, of course, under Nostra Aetate, condemned Christian anti-Semitism. But if you also look at Protestantism, Protestantism is it's an offshoot from Catholicism. So, of course, they picked up and carried this similar traditions of what their Catholic uh, forefathers had adopted before them. And we see with Martin Luther, his hatred, the book that he wrote, The Jews and Their Lies, that eventually Adolf Hitler quoted from to legitimize his torture and murder of the Jews under the Nazis. So it's an important, it's so important that we study history so that we understand where we came from and where we are today. And Yafa, what do you mentioned that we still have this issue of fear and, against the Jews. Does the Jewish community have a legitimate rights to be concerned and be fearful at this hour?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Look at all the anti-Semitic acts that are being done and anti-Semitic slogans and everything that's going on today that's anti-Semitic.
Mm-hmm.
Most of it is being done, unfortunately, I hate to say this, because I have a lot of Christian friends,
Right.
done by Christians who are anti-Semitic, and they were raised that way. Okay. It's the same thing with racism. People were raised to be hateful or distrustful or just didn't like, African American people or Asian people and having all kinds of ideas about them that aren't true.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And also about the Jews. They control the world. They control the media. They control Hollywood. You've heard all of that, right?
Yes,
you know,
absolutely.
and,
Yeah.
and all of these things, they make matzah with the blood of Christian children. I mean, horrible stuff over the years.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's understandable why some people have that ideology if they were raised that way, and it's unfortunate. But it's not true. Okay, those things are terrible things. They're not true. And that was, I'll tell you something. I've dealt with sales and marketing. And what the early church did, I'm talking second century, with Hellenistic influence, the Greek influence, okay, it was called Hellenism in the day. What they did was the most effective form of marketing the world has ever seen. Okay. If you have competitors with a different theology or ideology or a different way of looking at the creator of the universe and the scriptures that the Hebrew prophets wrote and all of that, you have a different way of looking at it. What do? You put them down, you denigrate them, you delegitimize them, you say God doesn't have anything to do with them anymore, and none of that works, you slaughter them. That's the most effective marketing in the world.
Yeah. It's unfortunate. Right? Humanity hasn't changed. Unfortunately.
No. So there is room to be concerned. I don't know if I'd use the word fearful, but the Jewish community also, because of this, is very close knit. We typically help and support one another and all of this. But now here we go back to the crypto Jews. Because of the fear of the Roman Catholics, this is my belief. Okay, I don't have proof of it, but my belief is that it caused the early Jewish people in Argentina who were Syrian out of Aleppo, but their ancestors all the way back also went back to Spain. Okay. They created a community ruling in 1927. Now that's before 1965, well before. Okay. So in 1927, they created a community ruling for their Syrian Jewish community in Argentina, saying that they would not accept any converts or reverts, which is the word they use for a returnee, somebody coming back to Judaism publicly, from secret Judaism, into their communities as members of their communities. And that's been going on since 1927, like 93, 94 years. This has been in place because of the fear. I mean, these countries in Latin America are all Roman Catholic, predominantly,
Right.
population. So I think it was fear that caused them to do that. Okay, they just wanted to be, their own little community, not have too much to do with the other people groups, but certainly not do anything to inflame them or
Right.
upset them or cause them to think they're stealing Christians, from the churches and converting them to Judaism. So the difficulty that's created for the crypto Jews is that in Israel, the minister of the interior created an administrative policy 4 or 5 years ago, roughly, okay, that said any Jewish person who had converted, okay, across any stream of Judaism, Orthodox, conservative, reform, reconstruction, renewal, doesn't matter. If they convert, they have to convert in the context of a recognized and active Jewish community. Now, our people, the crypto Jews, the secret Jews, and our ancestors were secretly Jewish because of it's called a takana, which means it's a community ruling. Because of that, they had to create their own communities. And the government of Israel calls those communities emerging communities. And so what the minister did, Minister Derry, he said that they would only allow converts, if they converted, in the context of a recognized and active Jewish community, those converts can make Aliyah. No one else can make Aliyah if they converted in the context of an emerging community. So now, not only in Latin America are people discriminated against and not allowed to become members of the regular Jewish communities in these Latin American countries because of this ruling, but our people can't make Aliyah either. So now, and I attribute it to the fear of the Catholics, okay, because these were Catholic countries in Latin America. So now there's discrimination against the secret Jews, the crypto Jews, both by Christians and by Jews, both, all because of the fear of what was created during the Inquisitions of 500 years ago. And these people get very, very little help or support from either side, either the Christian world or the Jewish world. And it's absolutely unjust, and it's absolutely against the Word of God, both from a Christian point of view, a true understanding of the Word of God from a Christian point of view of the first century, not the second century, and it's against an understanding of the Word of God from the Jewish point of view.
Well, this is interesting that you bring this up because the Israeli government has formed a ministry to address this specific issue. Tell us about that. Because they obviously see that this is an important, the Sephardic Jews and helping them return. Isn't this an important part of what the ministry?
No, the Ministry of Interior is now in different hands. Minister Derry is no longer in control of the Ministry of Interior. These are portfolios. The Ministry of Finance, the Ministry of Health, the Ministry of Interior. Okay, that's like Homeland Security, for Israel. So It's in different hands. It's a different person running now that portfolio. However, the situation as it exists right now is these parties that formed the new coalition government created coalition agreements amongst each other. And I think there's an overall coalition agreement. And in that agreement, they wrote, among other things, but related to this point, they wrote that they're not going to make any changes to the status quo when it comes to matters of religion and state. Okay? So they want to keep everything the same unless there's public pressure to do so. In other words, they're politicians. They got elected to their position within their party, because in Israel here we vote for the party, not for the person. And then they got into the government by forming this coalition. So they want to work on, I don't blame them, by the way, they want to work on the issues and the problems and the dilemmas where, let's say, 70 to 80% of the people in this country agree that those things need to be worked on and what the solution is. That's what they want to work on, because they want to keep the tone down. They want to keep the arguments down with the opposition. They want to, calm things down and not do something that might be considered to be radical. Okay. So, but if they were to receive public pressure, obviously from the Israelis, which also could be influenced by the diaspora Jews. So we're going to diaspora Jews as well with this story. Okay. So if there was pressure or just even influence and, people talking about it, this new Ministry of Interior, her name is Ayelet Shaked, could change that administrative policy, or she could even not change it, but just leave that policy in place and make an exception for the crypto Jews, for the people descended from the secret Jews. In Hebrew, we call them Anousim. So we say Bnei Anousim, which means children or descendants of the forced ones. Anousim literally means forced ones. They were compelled against their will. They didn't have freedom of religion. That was taken away from them. So that's what we say in Hebrew, Bnei Anousim, and then secret Jews or crypto Jews in English. So they could make an exception for these people from Latin America, Brazil, and all the Spanish-speaking countries, okay? And right into that exception process, what do they have to show? What evidence do they need to show? Is it DNA? Is it customs and traditions that were handed down? Is it names in the family? Now, Spain and Portugal both, a few years ago, decided they wanted to make amends to the Sephardi Jews that were expelled from their countries, that were persecuted and tortured and all the rest in their countries. They opened up citizenship for the Bnei Anousim, okay? They've published a whole list of names that are well known to be Sephardi Jewish names. Like my name is on the list, DaCosta, okay? And a lot of the intermarriaged cousins, okay, Cabral and Silva or Da Silva and Barros and Raposa, all these names, they're all on the list of Sephardi Jews. It's a Sephardi Jewish name. And also de Jesus. In English, we say de Jesus. In Portuguese, it's de Jesus, okay, how you say it. But that name is on the list. So practically my mother's whole family, and these are women who intermarried, with crypto Jews, secret Jews. So the Israeli government could say, okay, for these people, let's make an exception process. Here's the process they need to apply. They need to show us the names in the family on the mother's side, maybe DNA. Well, DNA is also used now for the Russians. Okay, so they can marry in Israel as proof that they're Jews. Okay, because they also had to hide because of Stalin. Okay, and what happened in the Soviet Socialist Republic. So this is all something that's doable, but that new Minister of Interior would have to do this. And unless they get influence, pressure, whatever you want to call it, from the public, not going to happen. It's not going to happen.
Right. So what about the
and I
religion?
understand.
Yeah, so we've talked about the political environment surrounding this issue. What about the religious? Because this is all biblical. And you would think that the religious leaders, both the Sephardic Jews and the Ashkenazi Jews, would agree and would be helpful in trying to make this process happen. I mean, there's a lot of talk about, the numbers and the Palestinians and allowing them to just come in and be made citizens with full access, like, the average member of the Jewish community living in Israel. But what about the religious community? What's their stance?
Well, here's the thing. Even though there's a prophecy about the Sephardi Jews in Obadiah in verse 20, okay, where he wrote, it's the second part of verse 20, actually. The first part talks about France, actually, Jews coming in from France. And this is a part of the ingathering of the exiles, which is also prophetic.
Mm-hmm.
So in Obadiah verse 20, the second part says, and the exiles from Jerusalem at Sepharad, Sephardi, will inherit the cities of the south. And I think that means the southern kingdom of Judah. Okay. Now, the difficulty with that is people's perception of the Messianic era and Mashiach and what Mashiach does when he gets here. Because some people think anyone who's been left out from coming to the land will then come to the land. So it's like Mashiach will do it.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
All right. So meanwhile, these people are really wanting to come home and doing everything the rabbis tell them to do, whether it's conversion or return, and living in a community where they're communityized, whatever you want to call it. But still, if the Israeli government, specifically the Minister of Interior, won't change that policy, adopt that policy to this people group, it's not going to happen. Doesn't matter what the prophecy says, because they can always say, the religious here can always say, well, Mashiach will do it. Don't worry.
Right. So we passed the buck.
Yeah, it's passing the buck, and it gets worse than that because there are some people feel so strongly about this. I mean, I've talked to many, many rabbis over the years, many Jews over the years about this situation. And I've been told by several of the rabbis, look, we can get challenged by our colleagues. And one of the things some rabbis are concerned about is that if they try to really start to work with these people, okay, they're going to be accused and criticized by their colleagues. Somebody else saying to them, who do you think you are, Mashiach?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. Because they feel strongly that Mashiach will do it. We don't need to worry about it. Mashiach will do it. So these people are neither Christian, they're not accepted as Christian because certainly they're observing Jewish law.
Right.
And they're not considered to be Jewish by a lot of the religious Jews because they haven't yet gone before a Beit Din to have their Jewish identity confirmed. Okay, and they need to do that. And or they're not accepted to come on Aliyah to Israel, which is a specific part of the Jewish people, because of this administrative policy got put in place 4 or 5 years ago. So really, they're not accepted and helped all around the barn, which is really a shame because our people, the Bnei Anousim, they cross all professions, professionals, doctors, lawyers, nurses, teachers, professors, and universities, anthropologists, I mean, you name it, because when they fill out a form to ask for our help from our nonprofit, one of the questions, it's a 10-question form, they fill out, one of the questions is, what is your occupation? So we know, yes, we also have barbers and people who do construction work and electrician work and plumbing. Of course, we have all of those, and farmers, but it's across the board, the professions of these people. And these people could add so much to Israel, to the economy, to the country. A lot of them want to live in the Negev. The Negev is practically wide open. That's part of the southern kingdom, okay, from Beersheba to Arad, further down. So it's really a shame because Israel needs a lot of these people, and they're very dedicated. They're Zionists, for that matter.
Right.
Okay, they really believe in the country and in prophecy. So hopefully God, because everything happens by him, will open up this funnel. Right now, we're dealing with trickles of people coming in. If we can, somehow maneuver them in. I have a lady I'm working with right now. It's really tragic. She went to a Beit Din in New York. She had her Jewish identity confirmed. She's got evidences up the kazoo, DNA, you name it, names in the family, whatever. She made Aliyah. They accepted her for Aliyah. Now, and that was 5 years ago. Okay, that was before Mr. Derry took over the Ministry of Interior, but okay. And she met this young fellow, and now she's engaged to be married in the fall. And she presented through me, I helped her, and she presented her documents, okay, to go to the Rabbanit to get approval, that yes, she's Jewish and they'll marry her. And it was denied. by the Rabbanut.
Oh, no.
Oh, yeah.
Mm.
So we're working on her case, and we've got a few other cases that we're working on about people who are already here. They already got to make Aliyah. Now they're being given trouble because the rabbis that worked with them to give them their return certificate that they're a returning Jew from secret Judaism, crypto Judaism, coming back. Those rabbis, it's not that they don't accept her. They don't accept the rabbis that gave her that document. So there's all kinds of trouble about what rabbis, can do what and all of this business.
Right, right. Well, this is a fascinating story, and as we're continuing this conversation, we're gonna have to take a break for now, and we're gonna pick it up again next week. And I really want to talk about when we come back next week, Yaffah, I'd like for you to talk about what can Christians do, or what can our audience do to be part of to play a role in this prophetic event in time, and how critically important it is. Because, this, we look at what's unfolding with the Bnei Anousim, and it seems it's happening in our generation. And obviously, God wanted us to be here. He knew that this situation would present itself. And, just like what happened with the Holocaust, there were many German Christians and European Christians, for that matter, who stood by and were silent and didn't speak up. And now our generation is being faced with an opportunity of playing a role with it by at the what is the word that I'm looking for, in helping Almighty God fulfill this important prophetic plan in history. To me, I look at this and I think it's amazing that it's happening in our lifetime, because generations before this, I mean, now we have DNA and we're able to research and trace family lineage, and we have an opportunity to play a role and be used by God to bring forth this important movement in prophetic history, as the prophet Obadiah has said, and as you mentioned during our program. So, Yaffah, God bless you for what you're doing. It seems to me like you're one person out there, carrying the weight of this huge burden that obviously God has placed on your shoulders. And I'm so grateful for the work that you are doing and continue to do in bringing this issue before not just the Jewish community in Israel and around the world, but even to the Christian community, those who follow God's word, who are committed to living out their faith. This is such an important way that we can partner with God. And I remember a Bible study teacher years ago who said, Henry Blackaby said, if you want to be used by God, he said that you need to look around you and see where God is at work, and then immerse yourself in the midst of it. And this truly is an opportunity, as we look around what God is doing around the globe, to play a role in helping to fulfill this prophecy in our lifetime, in our generation. So,
And it's an
Yaffah,
opportunity to undo an injustice that's gone on for way too long also.
absolutely, absolutely. Tell our audience again how they can reach out to you and learn more about what you are doing.
Okay, so they can use my name, Yaffa Bayta DaCosta, on Facebook. We have a Facebook group. The name of the organization is Ezra La Anousim, EZRALANOUSIM. But they can also write to me privately on email in any language. Obviously, English is my mother tongue, but through Google Translate, I can translate anything that's in an email. And my email address is YAFF, like Friday, Batya @yahoo.com. And thank you again, Lori, so much for having me on your podcast.
Oh, well, we're going to have you back next week. But no, I so appreciate this. Ladies and gentlemen, if you go to our website where we have our podcast, we're going to have this information, also the email address and the Facebook link, so that you'll see you can connect directly with her. And we look forward to having you come back. But ladies and gentlemen, you've heard the biblical truth again. And as watchmen, we have a biblical mandate to warn our brethren about these truths. We should be involved. We should be, like Henry Blackaby said, we should be partnering with God, looking for where God is at work. And this is an important work that he is doing in our generation. God will judge us for standing by, especially when we know the truth. And as Christian leaders, we cannot remain silent. We know that God warned the prophet Ezekiel also about the responsibility of the watchman. And once we are educated, once we are informed, then we are responsible for what we know. And you can sound the alarm. You can share this information with your family and friends. You may know people who, and you yourself may be someone, you've always had this love for the Jewish people, and you're of Spanish or Portuguese descent, and you've always felt that there was a special connection, but you didn't quite understand it. And maybe this is a revelation for you as you are tuning in and listening. But we have an opportunity to make the difference, ladies and gentlemen. And so I just want to thank all of you for tuning in to listen. In closing, please don't forget to join us for next week's podcast as we continue this conversation with Yaffah, and also the conflict that is in Israel over this issue. And of course, I want to thank you all, and God bless you all for all you do on behalf of our Jewish brethren, on behalf of the state of Israel, and on behalf of these United States. God bless you all. I look forward to being with you again next week. Thank you again for joining me on this edition of Proclaiming Justice. Please share this podcast with your family and friends. For more information about how you can get involved, please visit our website at pjtn.org. As a PJTN Watchman, you can help us keep up the fight to preserve our freedom for our children and their children for such a time as this.